A panicked pregnant woman banged on a millionaire's car window and begged for help. Little did he know that a few days later, she would sneak into his office and... The streets of New York glistened with rain, the city's neon signs casting fractured reflections on the wet asphalt. The rhythmic sound of Selina's bare feet slapping against the pavement cut through the rain like the ticking of a countdown clock. Her breaths were shallow and erratic, each one accompanied by a searing pain in her chest. She clutched her swollen belly with one hand, the other outstretched to steady herself against the cold, unyielding walls of towering brick buildings. Her hair clung to her damp face, and rivulets of water streamed down her cheeks, indistinguishable from the tears she couldn't stop. The city, usually alive with its chaotic symphony of horns and chatter, felt empty tonight. The void amplified the echo of footsteps behind her. "Selina!" His voice, sharp and full of venom, shattered the silence. Joseph's heavy boots splashed in the puddles as he closed the distance. Her name on his lips wasn't a call, it was a warning. Her stomach churned, not from exhaustion but from a rising wave of dread. She willed herself to move faster, ignoring the sting of her torn soles against the jagged edges of the sidewalk. Keep going. Keep moving. She whispered it to herself, a mantra as much for her baby as for her own survival. Selina pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint shift of life inside. "You think you can just run?" Joseph's voice boomed again, closer this time. "You think there's anywhere I won't find you?" Selina didn't answer, didn't dare waste the breath. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for something, anything, to shield her. The streetlights flickered in the storm, casting eerie shadows. In the faint glow ahead, a sleek black car was parked haphazardly along the curb. Its engine was silent, the windshield fogged over from within. She staggered toward it, gripping the handle with trembling fingers. Locked. Of course it was locked. She rapped against the window, her voice breaking. "Please, please help me." Her plea was barely audible over the downpour. She turned, and her stomach dropped. Joseph's figure emerged from the mist. His coat flared open like a hunter stalking his prey. His eyes locked onto hers, glinting with satisfaction. "No one's coming, Selina. You belong to me. Come back now, and I might let this slide." Her shaking hand found a loose chunk of concrete by the curb. She didn't think, didn't weigh the consequences. Raising it above her head, she brought it down with all the strength she had left. The glass shattered, a cascade of jagged shards falling inward. Her voice cut through the rain. "Help me! He's going to kill me!" Inside the car, a man stirred, his sharp suit wrinkled from a long day. His brow furrowed as his blue-grey eyes took in the scene. The drenched, trembling woman, the blood dripping from her feet, and the man closing in behind her with predatory calm. "Get in," he said, his tone measured but firm. He pushed open the passenger door without hesitation. Selina scrambled in, her breaths heaving, clutching her belly as if holding it would shield the child within. Before the door even slammed shut, the man shifted the car into gear. The tires screeched, water spraying as they surged forward. Joseph sprinted a few paces, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can take her?" he roared, his voice growing faint as the car disappeared into the rain. Inside, silence pressed heavy between them, save for Selina's uneven breaths. The man's grip on the steering wheel was steady, his jaw set in quiet determination. With a quick glance, he observed the bruises on her cheek and the bloodstains on her dress. "Do I need to call the police?" His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of concern. Selina shook her head, her voice cracking. "No, just drive, please." The man's expression remained unchanged, yet his foot intensified its pressure on the accelerator. He didn't ask more. Not yet. The woman beside him was barely holding herself together, her whole body trembling with a fear that didn't fade easily. Through the fogged windshield, New York blurred into streaks of light and rain. Selina rested her head against the cool glass, tears mingling with the rain outside. Her grip on her belly tightened. Her baby. Her future. For the first time in hours, she felt the smallest flicker of hope, faint but persistent. The man, William, as his business cards in the console would later reveal, drove on, a quiet sentinel. His gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, where the shadow of Joseph was long gone. For now. The interior of the car was warm, a stark contrast to the cold rain hammering against the windows. Selina sat hunched in the passenger seat, her breaths shallow and uneven. The sharp scent of leather mingled with the faint musk of the man beside her. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly, her other hand clinging to the door handle as if the motion of the car might toss her out. William drove in focused silence, his hands steady on the wheel. Every so often, he glanced at her. Not too long, not too intrusive. Her face was pale, streaked with rain and tears. Bruises marred the delicate skin of her cheekbone, the faint swell of an old injury visible under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "You need a doctor," he said at last, breaking the silence. His tone was even, almost clinical, but not unkind. Selina flinched at his voice, her head snapping toward him. "No," she said quickly, her voice hoarse. "I'm fine, just keep driving." William didn't respond immediately. His eyes returned to the road ahead, the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers filling the silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice was firmer. "You're bleeding." Selina followed his gaze down to her leg, where a thin stream of blood trickled from a jagged cut along her shin. Her soaked dress clung to her skin, revealing the extent of her injuries. She pressed her lips together, the flicker of panic in her eyes betraying her attempts to appear composed. "It's nothing," she muttered, her fingers curling against the fabric of her dress. "It's not nothing," he replied. His calmness was unwavering, akin to an impenetrable barrier she couldn't challenge. "And neither is whatever you're running from." Selina's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see Joseph's shadow looming behind them. The streets outside were mercifully empty, the rain masking everything beyond a few feet. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just don't stop." William exhaled through his nose, his fingers tightening on the wheel. He made a sharp left turn, the car jerking slightly as it rounded the corner. Selina clung to the seat, her body rigid. The bright and sterile glow of a hospital sign emerged against the stormy sky. Selina's breath hitched. "No," she said, louder this time, panic creeping into her tone. "You can't take me there." "You need help," William said simply, as though that settled the matter. He turned into the hospital parking lot, ignoring her protests. Selina's fingers clawed at the door handle, her chest heaving. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "I can't. He'll find me." William shifted the car into park and turned to face her fully for the first time. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, met hers. "And if you keep bleeding like that, you'll make it easier for him to catch you." The words struck her sharply, their harsh reasoning piercing through her fear. Selina's grip on the door loosened. She looked down at her leg again, the blood pooling on the floor mat. The baby kicked faintly against her palm, a small, urgent reminder. "Fine," she whispered, defeated. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and damp raincoats. William kept a step behind Selina as they entered, his presence steady but unintrusive. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, emphasizing the gauntness of her face and the tension in her posture. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Name?" she asked briskly, her pen poised. Selina froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced at William, her eyes wide, like a cornered animal. "This is an emergency," William said smoothly, stepping in. His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. She's injured and needs immediate care. The paperwork can wait. The nurse hesitated, her gaze flicking between them, before nodding. Right this way. Selina sagged slightly, her shoulders curling inward as the nurse guided her down the hallway. William remained motionless, his hands firmly tucked into his coat pockets. His gaze lingered on the trail of water and blood droplets left in Selina's wake. Later, in the waiting room, William sat in a hard plastic chair, his posture rigid. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, but his mind churned with questions. Who was she? What kind of man could drive someone to this state? And why had she been so terrified to give her name? He didn't have answers, and Selina wasn't in any state to provide them. For now, it didn't matter. She was safe. Relatively. He'd stay until he was sure she stayed that way. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Across the room, the door to the ER opened, and a nurse stepped out. She's asking for you, the nurse said, her tone soft. William stood, smoothing his coat. He didn't hesitate. For reasons he couldn't yet explain, he had already decided. He wouldn't walk away. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the small hospital room, sterile and devoid of warmth. Selina lay propped against a mountain of stiff pillows, her eyes fluttering open at the faint creak of the door. William entered quietly, his footsteps measured, his expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said, standing at the foot of the bed. His tone was neutral, but his gaze lingered on the fresh bandages wrapped around her shin. Selina didn't respond immediately. Her fingers gripped the thin hospital blanket, pulling it up as if it could shield her from his questions. Or her own vulnerability. "I didn't ask you to stay." "I know," he replied simply, pulling a chair closer to her bedside. He sat, his posture straight and composed, as though he were in a boardroom. "But I did." Selina's eyes flickered to the window, the rain now reduced to a gentle drizzle. Her reflection stared back at her, a hollow version of the woman she once was. "The doctor said I'm fine," she murmured, her voice almost robotic. "I'll leave soon." William leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Selina's lips parted, but no answer came. Her silence echoed louder than words, leaving her with nowhere to retreat and no one to turn to. Her gaze dropped to her lap, where her fingers nervously twisted the edge of the blanket. "I have a place," William said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "It's not much, just a spare apartment I keep in the city. You can stay there until you figure out your next steps." Selina's head shot up, her eyes narrowing. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "No, I don't," he admitted, his tone steady. "But I know what it looks like when someone's running from something, or someone. You urgently require a roof over your head." Selina studied him, her mistrust evident in the hard line of her mouth. But beneath her defiance was something else. Exhaustion, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights and too many miles run. She wanted to argue, to refuse his charity, but the fight in her had long since dwindled. "Just for a few days," she finally said, her voice barely audible above a whisper, "until I figure things out." William nodded as if sealing an unspoken agreement. "I'll handle the discharge paperwork." The apartment was a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the hospital. Warm light spilled from brass fixtures, illuminating sleek, minimalist furniture. The air smelled faintly of cedar, and the polished hardwood floors gleamed underfoot. Selina stood hesitantly in the doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "This is it," William said, setting her small hospital-issued bag on the kitchen counter. Bedrooms down the hall. Bathrooms on the right. Selina didn't move. Her gaze swept over the space, lingering on every corner, every shadow. She shifted on her feet, her unease palpable. The silence stretched until William finally turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. "You're safe here," he said, his voice calm but firm. Selina met his gaze, her expression guarded. "Safe," she repeated, the word rolling off her tongue like a foreign concept. She stepped inside cautiously, her fingers brushing against the cool granite countertop, as though testing its solidity. "Stay as long as you need," William added, moving toward the door. "I'll check in tomorrow." Her head snapped up. "You're leaving?" "It's your space now," he replied, his hand resting on the doorknob. "I figured you'd want some time to settle." Selina hesitated, torn between relief and the nagging fear of being alone. But she didn't stop him. As the door clicked shut, the stillness of the apartment settled around her like a heavy blanket. Selina wandered the apartment slowly, her bare feet soundless against the floor. The walls were adorned with abstract art, their swirling colors muted and controlled. She traced the edge of a bookshelf, her fingers brushing against spines of untouched books. Everything about the place screamed order, precision, so unlike the chaos of her own life. In the bedroom, she perched on the edge of the neatly made bed, her fingers grazing the soft linen sheets. The smallness of the room suddenly felt suffocating. She got up and moved to the window, pushing aside the sheer curtain to peer into the darkened street below. The city was a labyrinth of lights and movement, oblivious to her presence. Her mind raced, fragmented images flashing in rapid succession, Joseph's clenched fists, his sharp words, the sound of shattering glass. Her throat tightened, and she pressed her palm against the cool glass pane, willing the memories to recede. William, seated in his own apartment across the city, stared at his phone. The screen glowed with unanswered emails, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He could still see the bruises on her face, the panic in her eyes. It wasn't his place to get involved, yet something about Selina's silence gnawed at him. He tapped his fingers against the table, his mind already formulating a plan. A call to his private investigator wouldn't hurt, just enough to understand what she was running from. In the quiet, he resolved one thing. For now, he'd ensure she stayed safe, whether she trusted him or not. The rain had ceased by morning, leaving the city streets damp and shimmering under the pale sunlight. Selina sat by the window in the apartment, her fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea she'd barely touched. The room was quiet, but the silence felt oppressive, like a weight pressing down on her chest. Shadows flickered across the walls as she stared at her reflection in the glass. Every so often, her gaze shifted to the doorway, as if expecting Joseph to burst through at any moment. The clang of a car horn from below jolted her. She flinched, spilling tea onto her lap. Her breaths came in shallow bursts, her hands trembling as she set the mug down on the windowsill. A memory surged forward, unbidden. Joseph's fist slamming into the wall beside her head, his voice sharp and cold. "You think you can hide from me? Don't be stupid, Selina." Her fingers dug into her palms as she tried to push the memory away. The walls of the apartment felt closer, suffocating. She moved to the bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the hallway mirror. Something about catching her own gaze, seeing the bruises, the hollow eyes, felt unbearable, as if acknowledging them made them real. Across the city, William's office was bathed in the golden light of late morning. He sat at his desk, a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, his words deliberate. "I need you to dig into someone's past. Her name is Selina." He paused, realizing he didn't even know her last name. "That's all I have for now. Start with public records, anything recent. Focus on connections to someone named Joseph, and be discreet. The investigator on the other end of the line agreed without hesitation, their professionalism apparent, even through the static. William hung up and leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. He wasn't usually the type to involve himself in other people's lives, especially not to this degree. Yet something about Selina's haunted eyes, her reluctance to even share her name, made it impossible to turn away. He swiped at his phone, pulling up the hospital's discharge forms. Her file was bare. No insurance information, no emergency contacts, only the scrawled name Selina in hesitant handwriting. It was as if her life had started the moment she stumbled into his car. Selina paced the apartment, her steps soundless on the polished floors. She paused by the bookshelf again, running her fingers over the spines. The books were pristine, untouched. Her fingers lingered on one, pulling it free. The title was embossed in gold, the kind of book that felt more ornamental than functional. She flipped it open, but didn't read the words. Instead, she let her gaze blur over the pages, her mind wandering. The creak of a floorboard outside the apartment jolted her. The book tumbled from her hands as she spun toward the door. Her chest tightened, her breath hitching. For a long moment, she stood frozen, staring at the closed door, as if it might spring open. When nothing happened, she exhaled shakily and bent to pick up the book. Her fingers brushed its corner, and another flash of memory struck her. Joseph standing over her, the remains of a shattered vase at his feet. "You're nothing without me, Selina. Nothing." Her grip tightened on the book's spine, the echo of his voice reverberating in her head. She set the book back on the shelf and moved toward the window again, needing to feel the openness of the outside world, even if only from behind glass. That evening, William received the first call from the investigator. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm but expectant. "There's nothing before 4 years ago," the investigator began without preamble. "No school records, no job history, not even a driver's license. It's like she didn't exist before then." William frowned, his pen tapping against the edge of his desk. "That doesn't make sense. Everyone leaves some kind of trail." "Not her," the investigator replied. "The only consistent connection is this Joseph. He's listed as her husband, but there's no marriage certificate on record. Something's off about all of it." William's grip on the pen tightened. "Keep digging." As he ended the call, a sense of unease settled over him. Selina's fragmented state wasn't just the result of trauma. It was as though her life had been meticulously erased, leaving only pieces of her story behind. But why? And by whom? Selina sat cross-legged on the bed. The lights dimmed around her. The shadows on the walls shifted with the faint breeze from the window, and her eyes followed them, her mind distant. She reached out absently, her hand brushing over her belly. The baby stirred faintly, a small, grounding reassurance amidst the chaos of her thoughts. She leaned back, her head resting against the wall. Her eyes closed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, flashes of her life with Joseph played out in stark, disjointed fragments. His hand gripping her wrist too tightly, his sharp words cutting through the air, the cold finality of the lock clicking into place behind her. Her hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't know who she had been before Joseph, but she was certain of one thing now. She couldn't keep running forever. The apartment hummed softly in the quiet of early morning. Selina sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her fingers moved in slow, absent-minded circles, tracing the curve of her abdomen. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "I'm sorry for all of this, for not being stronger, but I'm trying, okay? I promise I'll keep you safe." The baby responded with a faint kick, and for the briefest moment, Selina smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through her otherwise guarded expression. Her smile faltered as her gaze drifted to the shadows shifting along the walls. "Maybe you'll grow up to be braver than me," she murmured, her tone wistful. "You won't let anyone tell you who you are." Her words trailed off as the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. She couldn't remember who she had been before Joseph, if she had been strong, if she had been happy. All she had now were fragments, jagged pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. Across the city, William stared at the contents of the envelope the investigator had just delivered. Photos, documents, and a newspaper clipping lay spread across his desk. His normally composed expression faltered as he scanned the headline. "Randy Peterson, missing, prominent businessman, vanishes amid financial scandal." Below the headline was a photo of Randy Peterson, a man with a broad smile and a kind face that mirrored Selina's delicate features. The investigator's report detailed the timeline of Randy's disappearance, his failed negotiations with a rival named Patrick Walsh, and the sudden collapse of his empire. The next page held a recent photo of Selina. Her wide, haunted eyes stared back at him, the resemblance to the young woman in the Peterson family photo undeniable. William's chest tightened. "She's his daughter," the investigator had said over the phone earlier. "Selina Peterson. She disappeared 5 years ago, the same time her father did." The report continued with chilling revelations. Patrick Walsh had orchestrated Randy's downfall, and Joseph was a pawn in his scheme. The documents outlined how Selina had been abducted, her identity erased through hypnosis and manipulation to ensure she wouldn't reclaim her father's estate. William leaned back in his chair, his hand dragging down his face. The weight of the discovery bore down on him. Selina wasn't just running from an abusive husband. She was fleeing a meticulously constructed lie, her entire life stolen and repurposed for someone else's gain. Selina stood by the apartment window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass. She watched the city below, its pulse steady and unyielding. Somewhere out there, Joseph was waiting, his control over her stretching like an invisible tether. But she wasn't the same woman who had cowered beneath his shadow. Her time in the apartment, though brief, had given her a small but vital sense of stability. She could feel her strength returning, not just physically, but emotionally. She wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, but the thought no longer paralyzed her. She turned away from the window and moved toward the bookshelf. The books, their spines neatly aligned, offered no comfort, but she pulled one out anyway. As she flipped through its pages, her thoughts strayed to William. His actions confused her. He was kind, but distant, helpful, but not invasive. She had expected him to press her for answers, to pry into her past, but he hadn't. What was his motive, she wondered? No one helped without expecting something in return. William sat at his desk late into the evening, the photos and documents still spread before him. He knew he couldn't tell Selina, not yet. The truth was too overwhelming, too dangerous. If she remembered too much too quickly, it could shatter the fragile foundation she was rebuilding. And Joseph. William's jaw tightened at the thought of him. The man wasn't just a violent husband. He was part of something much larger and far more sinister. Patrick Walsh's name was associated with numerous illegal activities, and Selina's kidnapping was merely a single component of a more complex scheme. For now, his priority was simple: protect her. He closed the file and locked it in a drawer, his movements deliberate. He couldn't afford any missteps. Selina's safety, and perhaps her future, depended on his ability to navigate the truth without letting it consume her. That night, Selina sat cross-legged on the bed again, her hand resting on her belly as she spoke softly to the baby. "Maybe one day I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "About how we got here, about who your mother used to be." Her gaze drifted to the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "But for now," she whispered, "we just have to keep going." As she leaned back against the headboard, a quiet determination settled over her. She didn't know who she had been, but she was beginning to glimpse who she could become. And for the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. William's apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the open-plan kitchen. He sat at the small dining table, staring at the locked drawer in his study where the truth about Selina rested. His fingers absently tapped the table, his mind a maelstrom of uncertainty. Telling her felt like igniting a bomb. Not telling her felt equally dangerous. She deserved to know. But could she handle it? The weight of the photos lingered in his memory. Selina's younger self, smiling beside her father, Randy Peterson, her face untouched by fear or pain. The timeline of Patrick Walsh's rise, riddled with fraud and manipulation, loomed over everything. Joseph had been Patrick's enforcer, a man who had stolen Selina not just from her family, but from herself. The thought tightened William's jaw. Is this the most shocking secret you've read this week? If so, leave a marshmallows in the comments below. Selina sat in the living room, her fingers wrapped around another untouched mug of tea. The warmth seeped into her palms, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She watched William, who stood near the kitchen counter, gazing absently out the window. His posture seemed relaxed, but his hand gripped the edge of the counter as if anchoring himself. She noticed things, little things, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, how his sentences sometimes stopped mid-thought, as though he were holding back words. His protectiveness was evident, but it came with a tension she couldn't place. "William," she called softly, breaking the silence. He turned, his face as composed as ever. "Yes? Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than she'd intended. William's expression didn't falter, but his pause was long enough to feel significant. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "And because I could." It was a simple answer, but it didn't satisfy her. "And that's it. No other reason." "Does there need to be?" he countered, his tone calm but firm. Selina's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't push further, but her suspicion grew. Something about him felt off. Not unsafe, but withholding. That evening, William sat in his study, his desk lamp casting a warm glow over the papers spread before him. The investigator's latest report detailed Patrick Walsh's sprawling network. Money laundering, blackmail, and corporate takeovers disguised as legitimate business. The report depicted a man who thrived on destruction, with Selina being just one casualty in his quest for power. William leaned back in his chair, his fingers running through his hair. His thoughts turned to Selina again. She wasn't just a victim, she was a key, whether she realized it or not. Patrick had exploited the gaping hole Randy Peterson's disappearance had left in the corporate world. If Selina reclaimed her identity, it could unravel everything Patrick had built. But was she ready for that? Selina sat cross-legged on the bed, her hand resting lightly on her belly. The baby's movements had become a comforting constant, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. She traced gentle circles over her stomach, her voice soft as she spoke. "You're stronger than me already," she said, with a small, sad smile. "I can feel it. Maybe that's why you keep reminding me you're here, to make sure I don't forget there's still something worth fighting for." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "I don't know who I was before this, before him. Maybe I wasn't anyone at all, but you're going to be someone amazing. I'll make sure of that." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "And maybe one day we'll figure out who your mother really is." Her words felt heavier than they should have. The fragments of memory she carried were jagged and incomplete, but they carried a quiet promise of answers. She wasn't sure she wanted to find them, not yet. But a part of her was beginning to wonder if the truth was closer than she realized. The next morning, William received another call from the investigator. "Patrick Walsh's dealings run deeper than we thought," the voice on the line said. "Selina is not merely an unresolved issue. She poses a significant threat. If he realizes she's still alive, he'll want to eliminate her." Quietly. William's grip on the phone tightened. "And Joseph? He's still in the city, probably waiting for her to slip up. If she goes back to him, she won't make it out again." The words lingered long after the call ended. William leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the drawer, holding the photos and documents. The stakes were higher than he'd anticipated, and the more he learned, the clearer it became that Selina's safety was precarious at best. When he finally stepped out of the study, he found Selina sitting by the window, her gaze distant. She turned when she heard him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been working late," she said, her tone light but pointed. "Just catching up on some things," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. Her suspicion didn't waver, but she didn't press. Instead, she returned her gaze to the city below, the tension between them unspoken but palpable. As the evening settled over the apartment, William stood by his desk once more, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on him. He couldn't tell her, not yet, but he could protect her, and for now, that would have to be enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, pooling on the hardwood floors. Selina moved quietly through the space, her hands brushing over the smooth surfaces of the kitchen counter as she placed the dishes she had just washed onto the drying rack. It wasn't much, but she needed to do something, anything, to repay William for his kindness. Her body was still healing, but her strength was returning, and the small routines of cleaning gave her something to focus on besides the swirling chaos in her mind. "Just one more thing," she murmured to herself as she dried her hands on a dish towel and turned toward the hall leading to William's study. He had left earlier, his departure characteristically quiet, but she noticed the faint crease of tension on his face when he said goodbye. The study door was ajar, and Selina hesitated before stepping inside. The room was modest, with a sturdy desk at its center and bookshelves lining the walls. Papers were neatly stacked on the desk, alongside a locked drawer she hadn't noticed before. Her gaze lingered on it briefly before she began dusting the shelves. Half an hour passed in silence, punctuated only by the occasional scrape of a chair leg as she moved it to clean underneath. As she worked, her eyes kept drifting back to the desk. Something about the room felt heavy, as though it held secrets too big to be contained. Her curiosity nagged at her, and she found herself walking toward the desk without realizing it. Her fingers grazed the edge of the papers, then froze. A corner of a photograph peeked out from beneath the stack. Selina hesitated, her pulse quickening, but her hand moved on its own, pulling the photograph free. It was an image of a young woman. Her. But not the Selina she saw in the mirror each morning. This version of her was vibrant, smiling and carefree, standing next to a man with kind eyes and a broad grin. The caption on the back read, "Randy and Selina Peterson." The mug she had been holding slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor. Selina barely noticed as she pulled the rest of the papers toward her, her trembling hands rifling through them. Headlines screamed at her from old news articles. Randy Peterson missing amid corporate scandal. Walsh Industries' Patrick Walsh acquires Peterson Enterprises. No leads in disappearance of Peterson's daughter, Selena. Her breathing grew shallow as her mind tried to make sense of the fragments in front of her. Dates, names, faces. They collided in a chaotic blur. Then she saw another file, marked simply, Joseph. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside were surveillance photos of Joseph with another man, Patrick Walsh. Beneath them were pages of notes detailing hypnosis techniques, psychological manipulation, and accounts of Selena's abduction. As buried memories suddenly surfaced, her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. It started with flashes. A man, her father, laughing as he lifted her onto his shoulders. His face dissolved into Patrick Walsh's cold, calculating smile, Joseph's hands gripping her arms too tightly, his voice low and venomous as he whispered lies she had believed for years. The sterile walls of a room where someone spoke to her, their words chipping away at the person she once was. Selena staggered back, clutching the edge of the desk for support. Her chest heaved as the memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the papers scattering around her like fallen leaves. William returned an hour later to find the apartment eerily quiet. The front door was unlocked, and he stepped inside cautiously, setting his keys on the counter. "Selena," he called, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness. He found her in the study, sitting amidst a sea of documents, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with equal parts fury and devastation. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling with accusation. "You knew who I was, and you didn't tell me." William's stomach sank, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her gaze. "Selena, Why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why would you keep this from me? My father, my life, everything." Her hands trembled as she gestured to the papers. "All of this, it's my past, my family. You knew, and you said nothing." William stepped toward her cautiously, his hands raised. "I wanted to protect you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You weren't ready. I was trying to give you time." "Time?" Selena let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into a sob. "Do you have any idea what it's like to not know who you are? To live in fear of a man who stole everything from you?" Her body trembled, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. William moved closer, his concern mounting as he saw her hand clutching her belly. "Selena, you need to calm down," he said gently, kneeling beside her. But it was too late. She doubled over, a sharp cry escaping her lips as pain shot through her abdomen. "William," she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "The baby!" Without hesitation, William scooped her into his arms, carrying her toward the door. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm taking you to the hospital." As they disappeared into the night, the scattered documents lay abandoned on the floor, a testament to the truth Selena had uncovered and the battle she would now have to face. The fluorescent lights of the hospital seemed harsher than usual, reflecting off the sterile white walls and linoleum floors. Selena's cries echoed through the corridor as William carried her into the emergency room. Her fingers gripped his shirt tightly, her face pale and streaked with tears. "She's in labor," William said to the nurse at the desk, his voice calm but commanding. "She's barely 7 months along." A wheelchair appeared within seconds, and William carefully set Selena down. Her breathing was labored, her hands trembling as she clutched her belly. A nurse placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, speaking in soft tones that Selena barely registered. "I can't." "Not yet," Selina whispered, her voice breaking. "It's too soon." "Mom, we're going to take care of you," the nurse said. "We just need you to stay calm and breathe." William stayed close, his presence steady as Selina was wheeled away. The door to the maternity ward swung shut, leaving him standing in the sterile corridor. His fists clenched at his sides as he glanced toward the waiting room. But he didn't sit. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed the investigator. "She's gone into labor," he said, as soon as the call connected. "Joseph will know she's here if he's been tracking her. I need security at the hospital tightened immediately." The investigator didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll contact local authorities. Sit tight." William hung up and exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the maternity ward door. He couldn't afford to leave Selina unprotected. Not now. Inside the delivery room, Selina's world had narrowed to pain and fear. The baby was coming too soon, her contractions relentless and unforgiving. Her head swam with images of Joseph, his voice cutting through the chaos of her thoughts. "You're mine, Selina. You'll always be mine." "No," she whispered through clenched teeth, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "He's not taking this from me. Not this." "Selina, you're doing great," the doctor said, her voice firm but encouraging. "We need you to focus now. You can do this." Gritting her teeth, Selina let out a guttural cry. Every ounce of her pain and fear was channeled into that moment, her determination to protect her child overpowering the chaos in her mind. Meanwhile, Joseph stood in the shadows outside the hospital, his coat pulled tightly around him. His eyes scanned the windows above, calculating. He had been tracking Selina's movements for weeks, waiting for the moment she would slip up. And now, here she was, vulnerable and exposed. A cruel smile played on his lips as he stepped closer to the entrance, his mind already weaving the narrative he would use to manipulate her again. But as he approached, his path was blocked by a uniformed security guard. "Sir, visiting hours are over," the guard said, his tone professional but firm. Joseph's expression darkened. "I'm here for my wife," he said smoothly. "She's in labor. I need to see her." "Name?" the guard asked, pulling out a clipboard. "Joseph Peterson." The guard scanned the list, then shook his head. "You're not on the approved visitor list. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Joseph's smile turned cold. "That's my child she's having. Are you really going to keep me from seeing them?" The guard didn't waver. "Hospital policy, sir. You'll need to contact her directly to be added to the list." Joseph stepped back, his jaw tightening as he calculated his next move. He wasn't going to be deterred, not by a clipboard-wielding security guard. In the waiting room, William spotted the guard's interaction with Joseph from afar. His blood ran cold as he recognized the man who had haunted Selina's nightmares. Without hesitation, he approached the nearest hospital administrator. "I need this hospital locked down," he said, his voice sharp. "There's a man outside, Joseph Peterson. He's dangerous, and he cannot be allowed near the maternity ward." The administrator hesitated, but nodded after seeing the seriousness in William's expression. "I'll notify security." As the lockdown procedures began, William pulled out his phone and dialed the investigator again. "He's here. I saw him outside." "We've got officers en route," the investigator said. "Keep him away from Selina until they arrive." William hung up and leaned against the wall, his mind racing. Joseph wasn't just a threat to Selina. He was a threat to the fragile life she was bringing into the world. Back in the delivery room, the sound of a baby's cry broke through the tension. Selina let out a sob of relief, her body sagging against the bed as the nurse placed a tiny, wriggling bundle into her arms. "It's a boy," the doctor said, smiling warmly. Selina stared down at her son, her tears falling freely now. His tiny fingers curled against her chest, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. "You're safe now," she whispered to him, her voice cracking. "I promise." But even as she spoke the words, a shadow of doubt lingered in her mind. Until Joseph was out of their lives for good, safety was a fragile illusion. In the hallway, William watched as 2 police officers escorted Joseph out of the building. His shoulders relaxed slightly, but he knew this wasn't over. Joseph wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. William glanced back towards the maternity ward, determination hardening his features. Whatever it took, he would ensure that Selina and her son stayed safe, no matter the cost. The fluorescent buzz of the hospital lights felt sharper now, cutting through the tense quiet. Selina rested in her hospital bed, her newborn son swaddled tightly in her arms. The rhythmic rise and fall of his tiny chest steadied her, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the storm raging within. She could feel it, a weight pressing against the sterile calm of the room. Joseph wasn't far. She knew it, and more importantly, she knew he wouldn't stop. The faint squeak of the door opening jolted her. She clutched her son tighter and looked up to see William stepping in. His expression was grim, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "They escorted him off the property," he said, his voice low. "But it's not over." Selina nodded, her grip firm on the child in her arms. "It won't be, will it?" William hesitated. "Not yet." Outside, Joseph wasn't deterred by the police or the tightened security. He lingered in the shadows of the parking lot, his patience a cold weapon. He was good at waiting. The game wasn't about rushing, it was about control. And Joseph always took what was his. With one last glance at the hospital's entrance, he moved toward a side door he'd scoped out earlier. No guards, no cameras. He slipped inside, his movements deliberate and silent. In her hospital room, Selina tried to rest, but her body remained taut with tension. The steady hum of the monitor and the soft murmurs of nurses in the hallway did little to calm her. She placed her son gently in the hospital bassinet, her fingers lingering on his tiny hand before she turned away. A shadow fell across the room, and when she looked up, her heart stopped. The hospital room was eerily quiet, the only sound the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and Selina's soft breaths as she cradled her newborn son. His small hand curled around her finger, anchoring her to the moment. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile sense of peace. An illusion shattered when the door swung open with a harsh clang. Joseph stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room with cold menace. His eyes darted to the baby in her arms before locking onto hers, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "You've been busy, haven't you, Selina?" His voice was low, mocking, each word dripping with control he thought he still had. Selina's body tensed, her grip on her son tightening instinctively. Fear surged through her, but it was quickly overtaken by something new. Anger. "How did you—" she began, but Joseph cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" He took a step closer, his gaze flickering to the baby again. "I've always known where you were. I just let you run for a while." Selina's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let him see her fear. "You don't belong here, Joseph. Leave." He laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. "Leave? This is my family. That's my child you're holding, and you think you can tell me to leave?" As Joseph advanced further into the room, The door behind him burst open. William appeared, his stance firm, his eyes blazing with fury. "That's far enough," William said, his voice sharp. He stepped between Joseph and Selina, his presence a barrier Joseph couldn't ignore. Joseph sneered. "Ah, the hero. Do you really think you can stop me?" William didn't flinch. "Security is already on their way. The police too. You're done, Joseph." Joseph's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I don't think so," he said, lunging toward Selina. William moved faster, shoving Joseph back toward the door. The two men grappled, the sound of their struggle echoing through the hallway as they spilled out of the room. Selina's heart raced as she watched, her son beginning to wail in her arms. The chase through the hospital halls was chaotic. Nurses and visitors scrambled to get out of the way as Joseph shoved past anyone in his path. William followed close behind, his determination unwavering. "You're not getting away," William called, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Joseph turned a corner sharply, slamming into a cart of medical supplies. He grabbed a metal tray, swinging it toward William, who dodged it narrowly. The clang of metal hitting the floor reverberated down the hall. Back in the room, Selina sat trembling, her son's cries pulling her focus back to him. She looked down at his tiny face, his features so pure, so innocent. "No more," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He won't take this from us." A surge of courage she didn't know she possessed pushed her to her feet. She wrapped her son in a blanket, placing him gently in the bassinet. Then, with steady steps, she moved toward the hallway. The fight between William and Joseph came to a head in an empty waiting area. Joseph had grabbed a chair, brandishing it like a weapon, but William stood his ground. The two circled each other, the tension thick. Before either could move, Selina's voice cut through the air. "Stop!" Both men turned to see her standing at the entrance to the room. Her face was pale but determined, her body trembling but upright. "Selina," Joseph started, his tone softening, dripping with false concern. "You shouldn't be out of bed. Let me take you and the baby home where you belong." Selina's lips curled into a snarl. "I remember, Joseph. I remember everything." His face froze, his composure cracking. "What are you talking about?" "My father. Patrick. The lies. The hypnosis. All of it." Her voice grew stronger with every word. "You didn't just take me. You destroyed everything. My family. My identity. My life." Joseph took a step back, his expression wavering. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Selina's voice was steady now, filled with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "And I'm done being afraid of you." At that moment, security guards and police officers flooded the waiting area. William stepped aside as the officers approached, handcuffing a struggling Joseph. His shouts of protest were drowned out by the cacophony of voices. Hours later, in a quiet corner of the hospital, Selina sat with William as the investigator arrived with a thick folder of evidence. The papers inside detailed Patrick Walsh's criminal empire, the role Joseph had played in Selina's abduction, and the financial ruin they had orchestrated for her father. "It's all here," the investigator said. "Enough to bring down Walsh and his entire network. The authorities are already moving on it." Selina nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Will it be enough to stop them?" "It will," William said, his voice firm. "You've already done the hardest part, Selina. You stood up to him." She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. In the distance, the sound of police sirens faded into the night, a signal that justice was finally in motion. The news quickly spread. Morning broadcasts were filled with images of Joseph and Patrick being escorted into police vehicles, their faces grim as reporters shouted questions. Headlines splashed across screens and newspapers. Corporate kingpin and accomplice arrested in shocking abduction scandal. Selena Peterson, survivor of a decade-long scheme, steps forward. Selena watched from the couch in William's apartment, her son cradled in her arms. The soft glow of the television illuminated her face as she stared at the screen, the weight of the moment settling over her. Each revelation, each image of the empire Patrick had built on the ruins of her family's life, felt both validating and surreal. William stood nearby, arms crossed as he listened intently to the report. "They're done," he said softly, more to himself than to Selena. "It's all falling apart." The footage shifted to courtroom sketches, showing Patrick seated stiffly beside his lawyer, his arrogance replaced by a steely resignation. Testimony after confession painted him as a manipulative architect of fraud, abduction, and coercion. Joseph's role as his enforcer came to light in chilling detail, the evidence meticulously pieced together by William's investigator. Selena's name was mentioned sparingly, shielded from the public's insatiable curiosity. But when it was, it carried a tone of awe. Selena Peterson, thought lost for years, emerges as a symbol of resilience and survival. She exhaled shakily, brushing a tear from her cheek as her son stirred in her arms. "It's strange," she said quietly, her voice breaking the silence, "to see it all laid out like that, like it happened to someone else." William sat beside her, his expression softening. "It's over now," he said. "They can't hurt you anymore." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Not just me. My father, what they did to him, to his legacy. It's not over. Not until I make it right." The cemetery was quiet, the winter air crisp, as Selena stepped carefully between rows of gravestones. She wore a simple coat, her son bundled against her chest in a sling. William walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. They stopped in front of a modest gravestone. The name Randy Peterson was etched deeply into the stone, along with the words, "Beloved father, visionary, and friend." Selena knelt slowly, brushing her fingers over the engraved letters. Her breath hitched as emotions welled up. But she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled. A small, bittersweet smile. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "It's been a while. I don't know where to start." She glanced down at her son, who yawned and blinked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "This is your grandson," she said, her smile growing. He's everything, and I promise I'll raise him to be the kind of person you would have been proud of." William stood back, giving her space, but his expression carried a quiet pride. Selena took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the gravestone. "They're gone, Dad. Patrick, Joseph, they can't hurt anyone anymore. But I'm not just going to let this be the end. I'll make sure people know the truth. About you, about the company you built, about the kind of man you really were." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, a younger version of herself, standing beside her father with wide smiles. She placed it gently at the base of the stone. "I'll honor you," she whispered. "I'll make sure your name means something again." Her son cooed softly, and she smiled, brushing a kiss against his forehead. As they left the cemetery, William walked beside her, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. "You did well back there," he said quietly. Selena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's a start," she replied. They reached the car, and as William opened the door for her, she paused. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "For everything. For standing by me. for believing in me." William shook his head, his lips curving into a faint smile. "You didn't need me to believe in you, Selina. You just needed time to believe in yourself." She smiled, the warmth of his words sinking in. As they drove away from the cemetery, Selina felt lighter, as though she had finally let go of a burden she'd carried for too long. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. She had her son, her strength, and the memory of her father guiding her forward. And, with William at her side, she knew she could rebuild, not just her life, but her family's legacy. It was only the beginning. The sunlight poured through the large bay windows of William's apartment, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. Selina sat on the balcony, her son cradled in her arms. The gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh blooms from a planter nearby, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to savor the quiet moment. Her son stirred, his tiny hand curling around her finger. She smiled down at him, brushing a soft kiss on his forehead. "You're my strength now," she whispered. "You've given me a reason to dream again." The sound of footsteps behind her drew her attention. Turning, she saw William stepping onto the balcony, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in his hands. He placed one on the small table beside her before settling into the chair across from her. "You seem more at peace," he said, his voice warm yet cautious. Selina nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "I think I am. For so long it felt like I was drowning in the past, in fear. But now—" She glanced at her son, her expression softening. "Now, I see the future." William smiled, taking a sip of his coffee. He watched her for a moment, the way her face lit up as she spoke about the life she envisioned for herself and her son. Her resilience and courage had been transformative, and in the process, something between them had shifted too. "I was thinking," she began, her voice hesitant, "of starting over somewhere new, maybe rebuilding my father's company, piece by piece. I don't want Patrick's legacy to overshadow what my dad worked so hard to create." "That sounds like a solid plan," William said, leaning forward. "But you don't have to do it alone." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a deeper meaning behind his words. "You've done so much for me already, William. I couldn't possibly ask for more." "You're not asking," he said gently. "I'm offering. Whatever you need, whether it's rebuilding your father's company or just navigating this new chapter, I'm here." Her chest tightened, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper swelling within her. "Why?" she questioned, her voice barely audible above a whisper. "Why would you do all this for me?" William hesitated, his gaze unwavering. "Because I care about you, Selina. Not just what you've been through or what you've overcome, but who you are now. You've fought harder than anyone I've ever known, and I—" He stopped, his words hanging in the air. Selina's breath hitched, her heart pounding as she took in the sincerity in his eyes. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'd like you to be a part of it." William's lips curved into a smile, a quiet but profound relief washing over him. "I'd like that too." Months later, Selina stood on the steps of her father's old office building, her son nestled in her arms. The Peterson name had been restored to the sign above the entrance, shining brightly against the midday sun. A small crowd of supporters and former employees had gathered, their faces filled with hope. William stood beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. He leaned in and whispered, "You've come full circle." Selina turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I wouldn't have made it here without you." "You would have," he said firmly. "I just gave you a nudge." She smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and affection. Turning back to the crowd, she raised her voice. Today isn't just about rebuilding a company. It's about honoring a legacy and creating a future. My father believed in the power of resilience, and I intend to carry that forward, not just for myself, but for my son and everyone who believed in him. The crowd erupted in applause as she stepped into the building, her son cooing softly against her chest. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Selina stood on the balcony once more. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities of the future. William joined her, his presence grounding, yet invigorating. As the two of them stood together, her son sleeping peacefully nearby, Selina finally felt free. Free from fear, free from the shadows of the past, and free to love. The future stretched before her, bright and untamed, and for the first time, she wasn't walking into it alone. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.